Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics. I am Kayode Okikiolu. On the news this hour, Labour and federal government gear up for another last-minute negotiation that could avert a looming strike. Now, both parties will now be looking to seal the deal on workers' demand for consequential increment for grade level 7 to 17. It's about an hour and 58 minutes to that moment. The Chairman, Senate Committee on Army, Senator Ali Ndume makes shocking revelation, saying over 800 soldiers have died in the war against terrorism, and that's from 2013 till date. But on the other hand, the federal government gives assurance of its readiness to procure military hardwares. Now, the program will bring you more updates on the November 16 Kogi governorship elections as civil society organizations appeal to political gladiators to shun violence. Welcome to the show. In about 2 hours, the Nigerian Labour representatives and the federal government will be opening another round of negotiation on Labour's demand for consequential upward adjustment of salaries of public servants. That's from level 7 to 17. The scheduled meeting is expected to reach a deal that will possibly avert a looming strike action by Nigerian Labour. You recall that just last night, after several hours of closed-door negotiations, the meeting between the Joint National Public Service Negotiating Council and the federal government on the full implementation of the new minimum wage ended without an agreement. And the almost 6-hour meeting, which held at the conference room of the Minister of Labour and Employment in Abuja, failed to reach a consensus on which percentage of increase is to be adopted by the federal government. On one hand, the labour unions are demanding a 29% salary increase for officers on grade 7 to 14 and 24% for grade 15 to 17. But then the federal government proposes 11% for officers on grade level 7 to 14 and 6.5% for officers on grade level 15 to 17. Both the government and the workers' unions are, however, keeping sealed lips on who is ready to shift grounds on the demands and proposals which have been made already. Well, I would like you to stay with Channels Television to get real-time updates on today's round of negotiations between Labour and the federal government.
Even though we thought the meeting would be concluded today, but that prediction was not successful, and therefore adjournment became necessary. To the best of our knowledge, the struggle we say continue applies. Tomorrow we'll meet by 2, and that meeting also determines the fate of parties. We expect that we close that meeting positively. So far, commitment has been shown, but we believe and the areas that are still in contest are critical.
Both sides have made a lot of concessions, but we discovered that there are some gray areas that need to be ironed out. So some documents and information are being sought, which we are providing. And by the grace of God, tomorrow discussions will continue. And we believe that we'll be able to get everything resolved by His special grace tomorrow.
Well, you just saw clips from yesterday's round of negotiations. So we're counting down to today's negotiations. Well, there's a twist to that story. The United Labour Congress, that's the ULC, has condemned the planned strike by the Trade Union Congress and the Nigeria Labour Congress, describing it as dead on arrival. In a statement signed by the ULC president, Mr. Joe Ajero, the union said critical sectors that would make the strike to be successful were left out of the decision. It said the ULC was part of the 16-man technical committee that gave birth to the tripartite committee on the review of the national minimum wage. He also explained that Nigerian workers cannot be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness, as in this case, and questioned the motive behind the nationwide strike without mobilizing all the national stakeholders and civil society organizations such as market women, students, faith-based organizations, community associations, and several others. Well, moving on to other stories, over 847. Well, that's the number of Nigerian soldiers killed by Boko Haram insurgents and said to have been buried in the military cemetery in Maiduguri, the Borno state capital, from 2013 till date. Well, this revelation is coming from the chairman, Senate Committee on Army, Senator Ali Ndume, who briefed journalists at the National Assembly following a recent fact-finding mission by the committee to the theater command in the state. Now, the allegations that some non-governmental organizations operating in the Northeast were offering assistance to Boko Haram, Senator Ndume said that this matter is being investigated.
From the record we saw in the cemetery, I think we lost, by their record there, over 847 soldiers. And that is in that cemetery alone. No, not this year. From 2013 to date, that is their record. And that in that cemetery, they have army cemeteries elsewhere. They have some in Abuja. They have where they bury their victims. But that allegation that there is mass burial, when I saw it there, it's not true.
Meanwhile, the federal government says it has completed the process for the procurement of critical arms, ammunition and equipment for the armed forces. Now, this is according to the federal government's delegation to a town hall meeting on banditry, cattle rustling and kidnapping in northwest states, headed by the Minister of Information and Culture, Mr. Lai Mohammed. According to the minister, the procurement of these equipment will further increase combat readiness of the armed forces in the fight against security challenges in the country. He also told participants at the town hall meeting that the interaction is a credible platform for the governors of the frontline states to highlight their successes in tackling the challenge, as well as an opportunity for the federal government to speak on its line of action. The governors of Katsina, Sokoto and Zamfara states were also in attendance. Well, for more perspectives on the security situation in the Northeast and the report of the Nigerian Army casualty by Senator Ali Ndume, which you listened to earlier, we have a former Director of Military Intelligence, General Saad Abubakar, joining us from our Abuja studio, and alongside a security expert, Mr. Kabir Adamu. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. Now, I'd like to begin with General Abubakar. Now, this statement, this revelation, if you may call it that, that was made by Senator Ali Ndume, how did you receive it? Quite sad, but I'd like to know your take on this revelation.
Well, thank you very much, Kayode. Now, naturally, whenever there is combat, whenever a nation is engaged in conflict, it is expected that soldiers are going to lay down their lives willingly, because that is what they signed up for. So, in combat and looking at the span of 10 years in which Nigeria has been combating Boko Haram and then recently ISWAP, it is expected that a large number of casualties will have been incurred. And so the fact that the military has a record of the number of casualties in that cemetery at least shows to some extent that they are doing what they are supposed to do. But naturally, in 10 years, I will expect that the casualties are a lot higher than that. John, like he said, that is only in that cemetery. So there are other areas where the cemeteries are located, and there are those that will have been given field burial out there in the field, probably because of the combat situation.
All right. So this is really shocking. A lot of Nigerians heard this, and it just once again reminded us of, the atrocity that has been committed over time in the Northeast. Just to be clear, he says this is from 2013 to 2019. That's, I believe, about 6 years. So we wonder the previous years, and he also said there are more records that they probably don't have. But Mr. Adamu, this also brings to question the talk about equipping the armed forces. Now, on this, fact-finding mission that the Senate took to Borno State, I remember the theater commander of Operation Lafia Dole saying that the army needs combat helicopters. And you sort of wonder, this is essential. So why aren't we at least giving them enough funding and equipment? Why does it seem as though this is not a priority at this point?
Well, we have to remember that this is just one unit of the Army speaking. Over time, over the years, we've had the Air Force acknowledging and thanking the current administration of President Buhari for funding the purchase of equipment, and they've expanded their platforms. They've added several new components. They've also recruited and trained several personnel in different aspects of warfare. So I'm a bit hesitant with that request by the Army in particular. If there is an improved synergy between the Army and the Air Force, then perhaps I would like to hear from the Army why they are making such requests, knowing in mind that, for instance, the Air Force has those components. There is chatter within the intelligence community of this Cold War, if I use that language, between the Chief of Army Staff and the Chief of Air Staff. If that is true, then unfortunately this revelation by Senator Ndume is an indication of that friction, and it shouldn't be in a situation of war in the country.
Just to sort of put this in perspective, now we understand the peculiarity of that, the conflict in the Northeast, especially because things happen so fast. And they say that, according to the theater commander of Operation Lafia Dole, that's Major General Segun Adeniyi, he's of the opinion that if they have this, equipment, for example, this combat helicopters with them at that moment, they can immediately deploy them and then get results. So, with this form of explanation, don't you think that's enough? And this is for General Abubakar. How hard is it to get this equipment? This is not a Super Tucano, honestly. This is just a combat helicopter. How hard is it?
Well, when it comes to issue of military provisioning and military acquisitions, we all know that these are things that are not off the shelf. Naturally, it takes time for agreements to be reached. And of course, there would be international politics depending on who is on whose side, what equipment are you buying, who is the manufacturer, where are you buying it from. So defense procurement takes time. If you look at the politics surrounding the purchase of the Super Tucanos by the Air Force, it took so long before an agreement was reached for payment to be made. Payment has been made since last year, and we're still not going to receive them until 2023. So what is expected is there should be synergy within the defense ministry. You actually, in your provisioning, you actually make purchases for your next war. Any nation that is buying equipment and weaponry for its current war has already lost the battle. Because ideally, you know that it takes time to provision. So you need to conduct horizon scanning, scenario plannings, know what your next battle or know what your next war is going to be, what are going to be your security challenges, and then acquire weaponry and equipment that will enable your armed forces to match that threat. The moment you wait until a war is sitting on your laps before you start talking about making purchases, then you have failed.
Okay.
You have failed woefully, you have failed the nation, and whatever is going to be done is going to be palliative, because you're going to be chasing after resolution of the problem.
Some have argued, like I said earlier, that, some of this equipment probably should not take as long to purchase, like we have the Super Tucano. But then we want to focus on the humanitarian situation. You might recall that report by the Red Cross about 22,000 people missing over the course of this conflict. You have millions displaced. And, we're looking to the Northeast and thinking, how can we speed up rehabilitation and rebuild in the Northeast? That will form the crux of our conversation when we return on the program. Stay with us.